Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined today by my co-host, Matt Derailed. Welcome back.
What's going on, guys?
And today we're going to be getting into Beat the Waiver Wire for Week 13. We are very excited to do this video as usual. So if you have guys going on your IR slots as we get into the end of the Friday injury reports over the weekend, you're looking for guys to add, this is the video for you. And if you are new here and would throw us a subscribe, we would love that. Hit that button down below. We're trying to get to 325. We're closing in on that number pretty quickly here, so hopefully we can get there by the end of this weekend. And without further ado, let's get into the first player that we're going to talk about here. We're going to start at the running back position. Not a lot going on at quarterback in terms of beat the waiver wire. Pretty much all of the turnover that has happened in the last couple of days was what we were kind of foreshadowing. Daniel Jones getting benched and cut. So, we're on to Tommy DeVito. There's not a lot of other changes that are going to be happening at quarterback, unfortunately. So we are going to start with running back. And the first guy we're going to talk about is Trey Benson. So he's coming off bye, right? And he had back-to-back weeks where his snap count was elevated a little bit, where he got 9 and then 12 touches. He had 87 yards in the game right before the bye week. And so I think, he's very productive as a rusher. He's done a little bit as a pass catcher these last 2 weeks too, which has been good to see. And so coming out of the bye, we talk about this all the time. It's going to be a theme again today that rookies coming out of their bye week should have expanded roles. So as this team looks to try and lock in a playoff spot, as they try and keep James Conner healthy throughout the rest of the season, I do think that there is an expanded role here for Benson. Now, the upside of a possible Conner injury at any point during the season is massive with Trey Benson. He is going to be a league winner for sure if Conner gets hurt. And, the playoff schedule is New England, Carolina, and the Rams. Like, it is such an easy playoff schedule. So if Conner is not playing during those games, Benson is going to be locked in RB2 for these weeks. He's going to look phenomenal. I promise you that. The offense is good overall. He's going to be having a lot of opportunities to score. So that's why we have him listed here as the top option at the running back position.
Yeah, definitely make sure, especially if you are a Conner owner, to get Benson on your team. This is definitely the time of the season where you want to be protecting those top end assets. And we've talked about Benson quite a bit. Like, his measurables are off the charts, his athletic scores are off the charts. These are the type of players, young, coming off a bye, that if something does happen to Conner, that that you can plug and play just based on the talent specifically. It's not going to turn into some random committee or some other guy that they pick up off the streets. So I do like Benson quite a bit. And you mentioned, Patriots and the Panthers specifically, those first 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs, like, that is just tantalizing to think about. So really like Benson as a player, really expect him to continue to get more touches just because they are in first place in the division and they're going to need to ride Conner, should they make a decent playoff.
Obviously off the chart measurables, right, with the athletic scores and everything. And I really do think, even if you don't have Conner, right, you obviously highlight him as the handcuff value, but even if you don't have Conner, go and get Benson on your team if you have the spot. Moving down to the second guy that we want to talk about here at the running back position is Jaylen Wright. So I did want to mention his snap share has also been elevated, increasing over the last 3 weeks. It was 15, 17, and then 26%. And we actually did see him play more than Raheem Mostert in this past game. And he got more carries than Raheem Mostert over the last 2 weeks. So it's not like he's done very much with it. You go look at his player page, it's very uninspiring, right? He does not have a lot of production over that time. But the increasing role is something that we want to look at here. And I do think if anything were to happen to HN, Wright is going to be the one that you want, not Mostert. So if you're still holding Mostert or you still want a piece of the Dolphins' backfield, I think it's the time right now to switch over to Wright before this week, before we see anything change against New England. There's also the blowout possibility against New England. Like, the Dolphins don't really blow anybody out, so maybe not. But if we do see them get up by multiple scores in the fourth quarter and they kind of give the keys to Wright to try and see how he can do with a little bit more of an expanded role, I think that could happen this week against a defense that they can run on. So overall, Wright is obviously an excellent player, still very young, 21 years old. I do think this is somebody that over the final stretch of the season could be valuable for your teams. And again, the handcuff value is through the roof.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm still seeing Mostert on some starting lineups and rostered as high as he is. I think people are still kind of holding on to what they saw last year out of him. But he's 32 years old. Like, he had a great season last year. But Wright definitely is the future for this team. And one thing to add on top of it too is with how poorly Miami's season has gone this year, maybe toward the end of the year, they start to kind of keep Achane fresh for next season. Obviously, he's a big part of their long-term plans. See what they have with Wright more. Really like him as a player. And we mentioned, the measurables with Trey Benson. Wright's right up there with him. He ran a 4.38 at 210 pounds. Was a very good prospect coming into the league. So really like him as a player, and I think they're going to continue to push him a little bit more rest of season.
Yeah, I'd have to look with Wright, but I think he had like the 95 plus athletic score, coming out. So
yeah,
that's the type of player that the Dolphins love to have, especially in their backfield. He got his first reception in a game last week too. So maybe the role in the passing game could be, possibly something that he starts to expand on. Again, we're looking for a role here, not necessarily the production that has happened. So I think you could do worse than Wright. Looking down to other players at the running back position, specifically handcuffs. So, if you have one of these high-end running backs that has a clear handcuff, at this point in the year, right, like if you have the spot, obviously bye weeks are rough this week. So for the most part, you're not really going to just be having a spot. You're looking for somebody you can start. But if you do open up a spot with one of these IR players and have the opportunity to do it, you need to pick up guys like Jordan Mason if you're the Christian McCaffrey owner. He's now 45% rostered. Like there's people dropping him at a pretty alarming rate. If you're the McCaffrey owner, you need to strike on that. Same thing with Tyler Algier if you own Bijan. Same thing with Braylon Allen if you own Breece Hall. Like these guys that have high value, if one of the starters gets an injury, those are the guys that you need to be adding at the running back position, especially if you own one of those guys that are high.
Your rosters are pretty set in stone at this point. You can cut a guy that, your fifth wide receiver or whatever that you're not going to be using.
Yeah, for sure. Another guy that I should have mentioned too, I guess, is Kareem Hunt. Pacheco is still going to be out this week in week 12. Andy Reid just announced that he's going to be out. So, right, Kareem Hunt's going to be valuable this week. But again, another guy that you might want to consider trying to acquire if your trade deadline hasn't passed, or look out for in future weeks if somebody does decide to cut Kareem Hunt. Moving on to the wide receiver position, we got a couple guys here for you. The first of which is Jalen McMillan. So we were very excited about McMillan when he was going to be taking over as the possible number one option, right? When Evans and Godwin kind of went out at the same time, it's like, okay, here we go. Like this should be McMillan. Like he got 8 targets in that game where they both got hurt. And then he had 7 targets the following week, and then he's been out too. So it's a little unfortunate there. But coming off a bye, rookie player, right? We still mention this quite a bit. Evans is coming back, which I think is going to help open up the offense for him. So then he can kind of hopefully anyways slide into that Chris Godwin role. Obviously the running backs and Cade Otton have been significantly more involved in the passing game. And I think that's been a lot out of necessity. But if he's back off a bye healthy and gets back into that 6, 7, 8 target per game role, I think over this rest of the year, he can be very useful, right? Giants, Carolina, Vegas, Chargers, Dallas, Carolina. The only game in there that's a very difficult defense that they're playing against is the Chargers. He has the opportunity here, the runway. Everything should be lining up for him. And I think we're going to get a good look at what he could possibly be moving forward. So I really think that McMillan is somebody that you should be looking into heavily to try and get onto your team.
Yeah, with Evans coming back, that's going to open up this whole offense. And I think McMillan can slide into that role that he's more comfortable in, right? Like last year at Washington, he played in the slot 67% of the time. Now he can push into that position with Evans going outside. Not as much defensive attention on him. We know what he's like as a prospect, all these certain things. So I am excited about him long term. I know we got a little crazy with him maybe when Evans and Godwin went out. We were a little excited. But I think now coming off by in a very solid player with a very solid quarterback, he's someone I would be trying to get on my team for sure.
I will say we were really excited about him when that happened because I think additionally, on top of seeing what he was, we already knew Sterling Shepard's terrible, and we already knew that Trey Palmer's terrible, right? Yeah. Those were the other options, and people were like hyping those guys. It's like, no, dude, like we already know those guys stink. Like they're not getting any targets. It's going to be McMillan, or it's going to be just all the running backs. So anyways, hopefully McMillan after the bye can kind of step up here, more natural role. I think it's all lining up for him to have a good rest of season. The second guy that I want to talk about at receiver is John Metchie. So he obviously 2 weeks ago with Nico still out had that big game, right? Nico was planning to play and then kind of was a late inactive. in the Sunday night game. And Metchie came in and went 5 for 74 and a touchdown. And that was like a surprise, I think, for most people. Obviously, we've talked about Metchie a ton on this channel, and we've talked about Metchie just a ton in terms of how good of a player he was at Alabama and just had these unfortunate circumstances that led him to now. But over the last 3 weeks now, he's played over 60% of the snaps. So Nico comes back and he still plays 61% of the snaps. And so I think that's a reflection on the fact that he is ahead of Hutchinson in the pecking order in terms of how they're going to play. He's going to play in the slot, maybe outside a little bit when they send Dell into the slot, but overall, he's the 3 on this team in terms of wide receivers. He's going to be the one that's going to take Stephon Diggs's snap share. Well, I mean, Dell is taking the snap share, but he's going to take over Dell's snap share, which is going to be a decent role here. So, I don't know how good this Texans offense is. I mean, CJ Stroud is undeniably at this point having a sophomore slump. Obviously, losing Nico for a big portion of the year has kind of fueled that, but with Nico back, it still wasn't great against a beatable Dallas defense. I know they were kind of kicking the crap out of him. Mixon was going off, but I was hoping that they were going to try and get the passing game going in that game because of how stuck in the mud they have been. So against Tennessee, we could see it, right? No Snead in this game. So Tennessee should be gettable in the air. And Jacksonville, by Miami, Kansas City, Baltimore, like there are some beatable defenses in there. So Metchie, I think if you need a guy, Tennessee, I think he could have a pretty good game here in week 12, especially if you're in search of a deep league starter. He's only going to show up with a very small projection, but I think he could end up with a pretty good game this week.
Yeah, and the Texans do play a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, right? And so I think, like you mentioned, him being part of their long-term plans. Obviously, the Diggs situation was very unfortunate this year, but Metchie's going to be that clear number 3 going forward. So I think they continue to get him involved. And yeah, it's just what you mentioned with CJ Stroud. Like, what a disappointment this has been this year. It's we were stoked on him this year. I know fantasy this year has been crazy as always, but man, this is not what I saw coming.
I was so high on him. I think that's a learning experience for me. I mean, I am always skeptical of the younger players, but I was so in on Stroud.
Yeah.
And I was pretty in on Anthony Richardson, right? I mean, I had him elevated to 6. I mean, I had warned about the fact that this is the type of guy in Superflex that can kill your whole season. Because if he does bottom out, then you're just left holding the bag and you invest really high in a quarterback that gave you nothing. So I do feel good about that warning, but the Stroud one, I did not have that warning at all. I was like, draft this guy 5, draft him with confidence, draft him ahead of Burrow, draft him ahead of Kyler, and that didn't work out. I mean, he has been so bad. So
I remember
I think maybe
the day before the season kicked off, because I had Richardson 5 and I was kind of chasing that upside, and I was like, dude, I cannot wait to see who finishes higher this year. And I thought, maybe they'd be in the 3 to 9 type range, and now it's just like, woof.
Yeah, I mean, Richardson lost his job literally, not even any good. Stroud weekly ranked outside of the top 15. You got guys like Goff and Cousins and Geno and all the quarterbacks that are established players, that we always recommend to, like, this is why we tell you to wait on quarterback in 10-team Superflex drafts too, right? You always can wait and get these guys that are going to produce at least decently. And if you invest highly in somebody like Richardson, we say maybe take a second one a little bit earlier, but Stroud was the one I felt like was safe. You get him, you wait, and you're going to be fine. And that just did not work out in terms of the draft strategy this season at that spot. Moving on to the DSTs then for looking ahead. Again, we're looking at week 13 schedules here for the defenses. If you have an open spot, the top team going to recommend here, and I cannot believe this is going to leave my mouth, is the Dallas Cowboys. But they get the Giants on a short week, who are just maybe the worst team in football right now, the Giants. I mean, you could also possibly say that about Dallas. So, I mean, I don't know. It's just a mess in terms of how I think that game's going to go. The offense, I think, is just going to struggle on its own, regardless of the defense. So, Parsons a couple weeks healthier, so maybe he can get after DeVito a little bit in this game, get a couple sacks. They hold them underneath 20 points, which would be the first time they've held an opponent under 20 points since week 5. So I say that while also acknowledging that the Cowboys have been objectively awful on defense. But I think that can kind of play out on a short week again on a Thanksgiving game. They're going to be televised. Maybe they get up a little bit more to get after the quarterback, and in that game, I think that they should be able to do pretty well.
Yeah, and at least, if you do grab him this week, we can see how DeVito plays this week. If he looks awful, if he takes 5 sacks, then Dallas is a good play. But I just can't believe they're forcing us to watch this game on Thanksgiving in the middle of the day.
Dude,
it's just like, can we flex
awesome,
Thanksgiving?
dude. What are you talking about, dude? Dude, yeah, can we flex Cowboys off Thanksgiving for the first time ever? Dude, that would be awesome. But also, what are you talking about, dude? Cooper Rush versus Tommy DeVito, dude. I can't imagine a better quarterback matchup than that, dude. So bad. The other team that I was going to recommend is in this same game. So if Dallas isn't owned or you don't believe in Dallas, the Giants going up against the Cowboys, I think can put out a pretty good output here as well, right? Dallas, Cooper Rush, terrible. Who knows if Ferguson's going to be back? I know Schoonmaker looked pretty good, but I don't know. Dallas running game has looked awful. I just think that the Giants can possibly keep this a low-scoring game on Thanksgiving and get after Cooper Rush a little bit. So that's the other team that I would recommend from a DST's perspective to try and get in there.
Dallas has just been terrible. Cooper Rush is terrible. CeeDee Lamb's banged up. I don't think that they would shut him down, especially on a primetime game, but they're just so far out of it. It's just ugly.
Yeah, it's so bad. And I mean, if you're relying on Tolbert, I mean, I think the Giants can shut him down, right? And CeeDee Lamb obviously banged up. If he flares up this week at all, right? And then, you get news that the Giants are going to have to play against Dallas without CeeDee Lamb. That's even more confidence that you can have in him for that week. So, or in the defense for that week anyways. So, yeah, I mean, again, start him, don't watch the game, but hope they can kind of put something together. All right. With that, thank you so much. If you're still here, please hit that subscribe button as we try and get to 325. And we look forward to talking to you guys in the next one. Good luck this weekend.
Later.